One day, I suddenly realized something important, like when you get a great idea and a light bulb appears above your head in cartoons. It turned out that my third child wasn't really my biological child. She belonged to someone else. I was talking on the phone with someone from genealogygurus.com, trying to find out why my daughter's DNA test was taking so long. I had given it to her as an extra Christmas present and gave the person on the phone the numbers to check on it. After waiting for about 5 minutes, he told me that the test had been done. But he couldn't give me more details because of privacy rules between the company and the person who took the test. I asked, why isn't my daughter showing up in my DNA results if you processed it? I was really hopeful when I asked. The person on the phone seemed a bit annoyed and said, Sir, there are many reasons why your daughter might not show up in your DNA matches, but I can't talk about this specific test with you. That's when I realized, like a light bulb turning on in my head, the main reason she isn't in my matches is because she's not my biological child. I hung up feeling stunned. I remember hitting the red end call button and then breaking down in tears. I woke up a few minutes later, curled up on the couch in the family room. I still had 15 minutes left before my lunch break, so I decided to call my daughter, who was probably on her lunch break too since we worked in the same time zone. I knew she liked having lunch while reading, so I wasn't worried about interrupting her. She answered the phone right away and greeted me with a tired voice. Hi, Dad, how are you? I replied, Sweetheart, you know I love and trust you completely, but I found out about the DNA test. I called the genealogy company, and they said it was done about 2 weeks ago. There was a pause, and I could hear her taking a deep breath on the other end of the line. I know, Dad. We need to talk, but I can't do it right now. Call me tonight and please make sure Mom isn't around when you do. I felt like everything was a blur as I drove back to work, and I have to admit I didn't get much done that afternoon at the engineering firm. My mind was filled with countless thoughts and questions, especially the unsettling thought that my beloved daughter might not really be my own. Being naturally analytical, I knew I needed to approach things systematically and tackle each problem step by step. As VP of engineering, I was used to handling challenges this way, thanks to the guidance of Dwayne, who hired me straight out of college. With him as my mentor, we turned his small company into a big success. I had a good job, great benefits, and worked with clever colleagues. At home, I had a lovely wife and 3 amazing kids. As the kids grew up and moved out, the house felt quieter, but I thought it gave us a chance to focus on each other more. As I thought back over the past month, a few strange moments stood out, like Marissa's phone call to Tracy about 2 weeks ago. One evening while we were watching TV, Tracy's phone rang. She saw it was Marissa and answered. Their talk lasted about 5 minutes, mostly with short answers from Tracy. When she hung up, I noticed tears in her eyes. I asked if everything was okay, and she said it was just about Marissa's cat having health issues. She tried to brush it off as not a big deal, but I sensed something was bothering her. It struck me as odd how upset she seemed about the cat's health problems. Little did I know, that might have been when Marissa found out the truth. Tracy didn't know about the DNA test I secretly gave Marissa. I didn't think it was a big deal to tell Tracy about it. Marissa was interested in genealogy, so I thought she'd like it. I've been studying our family history for years, including DNA testing, which I found fascinating. I assumed Marissa would be excited to take the test, but I was wrong. When I got back home, I tried hard not to act differently around Tracy, even though I was feeling really upset inside. I kept telling myself, deal with one problem at a time, one problem at a time. I met Tracy in my second year of college, but we didn't really get close until my last year. From then on, it felt like we were inseparable, at least from my perspective. We got married a year after college, exactly 31 years ago today. I always said it was the best decision I ever made. At 54, she still looks beautiful, and despite having 3 kids, she stays fit and looks like she's in her 30s. She's full of fun and humor, and until now, I was excited about spending the rest of my life with her. Around 8 o'clock, I told Tracy that I needed to make a call to Dwayne about a project we were working on together. I said goodbye and went out to the porch swing, where I could talk without worrying about Tracy hearing me. That's when I called Marissa. Marissa answered right away, and I could hear the worry in her voice. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have told you earlier, but Mom asked me to wait until she talked to you. She whispered before I could even say hello. Hey, I'm not mad at you. Take a deep breath. I said, trying to comfort her. "I'm not blaming you. You're just as caught up in this mess as I am." I could hear Marissa's heavy breathing on the phone, knowing how much this was affecting her. "I want you to know this doesn't change anything between us. I'm still your dad, and you'll always be my pumpkin. I've loved you all these years, and that won't change unless you want it to," I said, trying to reassure her. At this, she started crying harder, and her sobs made it hard to understand her. "I love you, Daddy. I only need you," she managed to say amid her tears. I told her gently that I didn't want to pressure her, but she was the best person to ask about DNA matters. I promised we wouldn't talk about anything else so she wouldn't feel stuck in the middle, but I needed to know if she had any DNA matches. She sighed and said that Amanda Anderson was indeed her half-sister. I was shocked and asked if she meant Amanda, George, and Jenny's daughter. She softly confirmed it. I comforted Marissa, telling her it wasn't her fault, and she never needed to apologize to me. Learning this also meant that George Anderson, known to my kids as Uncle George and to others as appeals court judge George Anderson, was Marissa's biological father. This realization hit hard. It also meant my wife had a relationship with him when he was a lawyer at the firm about 25 years ago when Marissa was born. Tracy worked as his administrator back then. George later became a state judge and moved to the state capital for his career. Tracy, however, didn't pursue a romantic relationship with George and stayed at GUI Howe, eventually becoming the office manager. During those years working together, George, Jenny, Tracy, and I became such close friends that our kids still call them uncle and auntie, and their kids call us the same. Sometimes when I traveled for work, Tracy and the kids would spend time at George and Jenny's lake house. It never seemed suspicious to me, and the kids talked about Aunt Jenny taking them places without us. I must have missed some important clues. Lost in thought, I heard Marissa calling my name. I apologized for drifting off and thanked her for her help, asking her to say hi to Drew, her husband. She then asked me what I planned to do. I admitted I wasn't sure, and she advised me not to do anything reckless. She said a little foolishness was okay, but warned against anything that might lead to trouble. I hadn't thought about hurting Tracy until then, but I promised Marissa I wouldn't do anything illegal. I never break promises to my kids, ever. My first priority was to reassure Marissa about our relationship, then figure out who Tracy's partner was in this situation. Next, I had to start divorce proceedings, but I'd need a new lawyer since the current one was connected to Tracy's workplace, which wouldn't work. After sorting out legal matters, I'd have to face Tracy about our divorce. Our home felt cold and empty when we were together. She talked a lot, probably due to nerves, trying hard to keep me happy, maybe hoping it would soften the blow of the truth coming out. It's unclear, but there was a growing distance between us, and she wasn't trying to bridge it. About a week later, I met with an attorney who became visibly concerned when he learned that my wife was the office manager at GUI Howe. Sensing his hesitation, I moved on to the next lawyer, a young woman in her 20s who smiled when I mentioned Tracy's position. She seemed unfazed by any potential conflicts with high-profile attorneys from GUI Howe. I shared the basics of my situation, starting with the fact that my youngest child wasn't biologically mine but George Anderson's, the Court of Appeals judge. Marie Robinette, my attorney, seemed interested rather than put off by this revelation. When she asked if it was the same George Anderson, I confirmed. I watched her reaction closely, ready to find another lawyer if needed. "It must be quite a story," she remarked, before we got into the financial details. Given our stable jobs, pensions, and benefits, Marie proposed a fair split of joint assets, keeping our pensions intact and selling the house. Marie's proposed plan would ensure both of us were financially secure, though I have a slight advantage due to my higher income and better pension. She mentioned that if I wasn't fixated on seeking revenge or causing financial harm due to the infidelity or lack of respect, we could proceed more smoothly. However, I expressed that I didn't want to harm Tracy financially despite feeling betrayed. When Marie asked about pursuing legal action against the judge, I responded firmly that it was my concern and I would handle it my way. Marie explained that if Tracy didn't contest the divorce, we could settle everything in about 6 months. But if she did, it might take longer, possibly over a year. I told her I hadn't set any strict deadlines yet, so she should take her time and ensure everything was done correctly. The next task on my list was the confrontation with Tracy. I waited another week, hoping she might feel guilty and confess. Our usual Saturday night routine included a date followed by a movie and intimacy, but we hadn't done any of that in the past 2 weeks since I found out about Marissa. I couldn't bring myself to act normal. Tracy didn't question it, which indicated she knew I was aware, but she was good at pretending. I decided to take her to a fancy French restaurant for our date night. We had wine and enjoyed delicious desserts. Tracy appeared happier than she had in weeks. After returning home, I helped Tracy with her coat, guided her to the kitchen table, and pulled out a chair for her, saying, "We need to talk." Tracy smiled slightly as I poured myself a drink and offered her one, which she declined. Sitting down, I told her, "You have the floor." Tracy acknowledged that her affair with George happened about 20 years ago and suggested we consider it a mistake from the distant past and move on. While I was relieved she didn't challenge the DNA test, her attempt to downplay it bothered me. I asked for details, questioning the timeline and frequency of her affair with George and if our older children, Barry and Kathy, were also his. Tracy clarified that Barry and Kathy were mine and that her relationship with George started about a year after Kathy was born, lasting around 3 years. She explained that it ended when George left to become a judge, ensuring his background check was clear. They only had a few encounters after that, mostly at the lake house, until they promised Jenny no more would happen during a reconciliation meeting. During our conversation, I expressed my frustration about our lack of intimacy and asked Tracy why she never tried to have an open discussion with me. I questioned if I was just a backup plan to her. She replied, wiping her hands, that she couldn't tell me before because she knew I would have immediately filed for divorce. She claimed she loved me then and still does. I couldn't ignore her feelings for George, noting how she started and stopped her affair with him at his command, making me feel like I was just a backup plan. Tracy desperately protested, saying she loved me with all her heart. I countered, accusing her of sacrificing her relationship with George for his career, knowing I was her fallback option. I pointed out that while she may have loved me to some extent, she understood how much I idolized her and depended on our family during George's absence. Tracy's reaction, looking down, seemed to confirm this painful truth. Tracy confessed that during her affair with George, she hadn't considered the consequences until the DNA test revealed the truth about Marissa's paternity. She assumed that because both she and George had similar physical features, no one would suspect Marissa's true father. Tracy didn't think I would question it, especially since Marissa resembled her, not knowing for sure until the DNA test. I reacted in disbelief, asking if she was blaming me. Tracy explained that she and George had discussed Marissa's paternity, but she reassured him because of his resemblance to me. She mentioned that George might not have known at first, but probably did by now, and she hadn't heard from him since Marissa's wedding. Tracy emphasized that regardless of what anyone knew, Marissa was still hers. She insisted that Marissa was listed on the birth certificate, raised by her, loved by her, and considered her own daughter. She warned George against trying to claim otherwise and told me to make that clear if he ever contacted me. I asserted my intention to have our other 2 children undergo DNA testing soon to confirm their paternity, explaining it was for my peace of mind. Tracy pleaded with me, insisting I already knew they were mine and questioning why I couldn't trust her. My newfound distrust was evident, surprising Tracy. She was also deeply troubled by the idea of me revealing her infidelity to our other 2 children, not wanting to appear unfaithful in front of them. Changing the topic, I asked for details about her affair, questioning how often it happened and where they met. Tracy explained that their relationship wasn't planned but grew from spending time together at work, becoming friends, and then progressing to something more. She described George as kind, considerate, witty, funny, and passionate, mentioning they had a deep connection due to both having spouses they loved. Tracy revealed that she and George discreetly met out of town, never at our homes, which they considered inappropriate. She whispered that they hadn't been intimate since their affair ended. When I asked about Jenny's knowledge and forgiveness, Tracy confirmed that Jenny knew and had forgiven them, as she had mentioned before. In a hushed tone, I expressed uncertainty about returning to how things were. Tracy tried to reassure me, acknowledging their wrongdoing but emphasizing that it was in the past and that I hadn't known during the affair. She begged for us to go back to how we were just a few weeks ago, as loving spouses, insisting that nothing had to change between us. Firmly, I told Tracy that our relationship had already changed. I explained that for the past few weeks, I had been questioning what I had done wrong for her to fall in love with someone else. I admitted that I wasn't sure if I could trust her again, let alone enough to stay married. I shared with heavy emotion that I had given her my heart completely, and yet she seemed to only value it when it was convenient for her. I emphasized that our marriage was meant to be built on unwavering love, not convenience. Tracy started crying, which would normally prompt me to comfort her, but this time felt different. I went to the family room, turned on the TV, and left her alone at the kitchen table. That night, we shared the same bed, but there was a noticeable distance between us. I didn't cuddle with her and kept myself far away when she tried to snuggle. She looked surprised and hurt, but I was too upset to care at that moment. On Sunday morning during breakfast, I brought up the topic of divorce to Tracy. She reacted strongly, arguing that the affair happened over 20 years ago and I hadn't known about it, urging us to move forward. I responded with equal intensity, emphasizing that a mistake remains a mistake regardless of when it occurred. I expressed my deep sense of betrayal, highlighting how she had deceived, lied, and cheated on me, breaking my trust. These were not issues that could simply be brushed aside. Unable to continue the heated conversation, I left the table abruptly, leaving my food half-eaten, and went outside to mow the lawn. That was the last direct conversation I had with Tracy until Wednesday afternoon, when she informed me that Jenny Anderson would be visiting us next weekend. I wasn't thrilled about it, but Jenny was an old friend who had been through a similar ordeal of infidelity, so I thought it might be valuable to talk to her. During Jenny's visit on Friday night, she arrived without George, surprising me. We kept our dinner conversation light and friendly, then moved to the family room with wine, likely to address the main topic at hand. Jenny initially spoke about the affair in a detached manner, but her emotions soon surfaced, leading to tears from both her and Tracy. Jenny revealed that when George told her about the affair, she had assumed it ended years ago, and he assured her it wouldn't happen again. She confessed feeling devastated initially, but later realized that since it ended before she knew, she wasn't deeply hurt by it. Understanding Jenny's perspective, I could see how everything unfolded. George's charming personality likely played a role. Even though I only learned about Marissa recently, like everyone else, I empathized with the situation. I appreciated Jenny's candidness and expressed my genuine regret for how things had unfolded. You noticed Jenny didn't mention the times Tracy and George met after their initial affair, especially at the lake house. It crossed your mind if they had informed Jenny about those meetings, but you didn't ask. It seemed like Jenny was almost apologizing for George's affair rather than being upset with him, which made you wonder about his skills as a lawyer. Unlike Jenny, you weren't as settled or swayed by eloquence, so you weren't inclined to give Tracy and George a pass. Despite their affair spanning 2 decades, you often pondered how leaving Tracy would impact you and your daughters. Jenny's insight prompted me to think deeply about whether my life would be better or worse without Tracy. I thank Jenny for sharing her perspective and acknowledged that it's a significant consideration that I need to think about carefully. Unlike Jenny, I didn't have prior knowledge of the affair. I stumbled upon it accidentally. Tracy knew it was wrong at the time and expected my reaction. She believed it would be best if I never found out and remained unaware. However, the DNA test changed everything, revealing the truth about Marissa's paternity and Tracy's past relationship with George. Now, 20 years later, I've learned about this intimate part of Tracy's history, altering my perception of our relationship. Tracy remained silent as Jenny shared her story. Unaware that I noticed her occasional glances towards me, I deliberately kept my composure to mildly annoy Tracy, not giving the reaction she might have expected. Jenny and Tracy exchanged glances of disappointment, realizing that my response wasn't what they had hoped for. I signaled the end of our conversation by shaking my head, getting another glass of wine, and turning on the TV. This indicated that I was done discussing the matter for the day. The ladies moved to the living room, chatting softly while I focused on the television. Jenny approached me in the family room on Saturday night, insisting that we needed to talk. Although unsure of Tracy's whereabouts, I agreed, and we moved to the formal living room, taking seats in a corner. Jenny began by acknowledging my pain but argued against withholding forgiveness and divorcing Tracy, believing it would be a mistake for both of us. She stressed that our love for each other should be the priority, and dwelling on the past was counterproductive. Jenny highlighted the tragedy of spending the rest of our lives apart over something that happened 20 years ago. She mentioned forgiving George and encouraged me to do the same with Tracy. I told Jenny that forgiving Tracy wasn't easy for me. I pointed out that unlike her situation, where she knew about the affair, Tracy never told me. I said Tracy's actions were hurtful because she knew they were wrong but didn't confess. I mentioned that forgiving her now felt hard because of the years of lies and betrayal. I couldn't see how I could trust her again. Feeling upset, I left the room without saying much else. The dinner that night was tense, and I didn't talk much. After a quick goodbye, I went to Malone's, a quiet place I liked. The bar owner, who knew me well, encouraged me to talk about what was bothering me. I told the bar owner about Tracy's cheating and the uncertainty about our youngest child's paternity. She was furious on my behalf and didn't hold back her thoughts. I appreciated her directness, especially when she questioned if Tracy had genuinely apologized or just regretted getting caught. It made me realize that Tracy hadn't truly apologized for her actions. The bar owner was kind enough to offer me free drinks and arrange a safe ride home, taking my keys to ensure I got back safely. When I arrived home around 2:00 a.m., Tracy greeted me at the door and helped me to our bedroom. I was so exhausted that I fell into bed fully clothed. Tracy kindly took off my shoes and socks, and that's how I slept for the night. Late one Wednesday night, my son called me while I was at work. He seemed to want to talk about Tracy's situation. Although he didn't say it outright, it felt like Tracy had involved him to sway me against the divorce. Normally, my son and I agreed on many things, but this time, it was clear that Tracy's efforts had influenced him, and he was leaning towards her perspective on the divorce. I had to be firm with him. I explained that while mistakes can happen, Tracy's actions continued for a long time, making it more than just a mistake. It became a decision. I asked him to imagine how he would feel if his wife Linda cheated on him. Even though the affair happened in the past, the lies and disrespect didn't go away. I also felt that Barry should stay out of our parents' problems. Taking sides and getting involved in this way wasn't appropriate. I felt frustrated and betrayed after discovering Tracy's secret, especially after admiring her for so long. If not for a certain accident, I would still be unaware. It felt like she had kept me as a backup plan. Barry tried to argue that I was overreacting, but I ended the conversation because it wasn't getting anywhere. When I got home around 6:00 p.m., Tracy was busy cooking a meal. She didn't look happy when I mentioned I wasn't hungry. I poured myself a drink, turned on the TV, and sat down. Tracy asked what was wrong, and I vented about feeling like the bad guy in this situation. I asked her to call Kathy and tell her not to contact me unless she wanted to be hung up on like Barry. Tracy seemed taken aback. "Why do you think the divorce won't happen?" I raised my voice, listing the reasons. "You cheated on me for 4 years, had a child with another man, and emotionally replaced me with him. You might love me, but you're not in love with me. You're in love with him. I've always been there for you, but now you're trying to turn our kids against me. That's too much, Tracy. I won't seek revenge or harm your relationship with George. Instead, I'll file for divorce due to irreconcilable differences. We'll split our assets equally, including the house, while keeping our retirement accounts separate." Tears streamed down Tracy's face as she stood up from her chair. It was hard to hold back, so I added, "You haven't expressed any regret about the affair, have you? Maybe because you don't regret it. You're just sorry I found out." That night, I drowned my sorrows in a bottle of Jack Daniels. The next day, I contacted my lawyer to start preparing the divorce papers urgently. She said they'd be ready for review on Tuesday and finalized by Wednesday. I insisted on serving Tracy on Friday night at my house, so she'd receive the papers in person. I also called Judge George Anderson's office, requesting him to return my call about something important. I knew he'd understand the gravity of the situation and respond promptly. When George called back a couple of hours later, he seemed uneasy. He understood what I was hinting at but preferred not to discuss it at his office. I agreed and set up a meeting at his house for the following Saturday at 10:00 a.m. He wasn't aware yet that Tracy would be served the night before, but I was sure he'd find out before I made the 2-hour drive to his upscale residence. During dinner at Malone's on Saturday night, Tracy mentioned that Jenny had informed her about my upcoming meeting with George. Tracy asked if she should come along, but I explained that this wasn't a casual chat. George and I had serious matters to discuss, and her presence wasn't needed. I reminded her of George's prestigious position as an appellate court judge, possibly in line for a Supreme Court position. Any aggressive behavior could have legal consequences and harm his career. She had promised not to do anything that could damage his reputation. After discussing my situation with a senior colleague at the office, I took some personal time to meet with my attorney and go over the divorce papers. Everything looked good, so I gave her the go-ahead. As I was leaving, she asked if I had any plans regarding Judge George. Surprised, I asked why she was concerned. She explained that she still handled some criminal cases and thought I might need a good lawyer. She remarked, "Engineers like you may not show emotions easily, but your methodical approach can be quite intimidating." She handed me her business card, and I left her office. The next few days flew by with a big project at work keeping me busy and focused, which was a welcome distraction from my personal issues. Even my colleague at the office noticed my dedication despite what I was going through. I told him I was glad at least work was going smoothly. However, on Friday evening before leaving work, I opened up to him about Tracy being served with divorce papers and my upcoming meeting with Judge George. I mentioned the possibility of things going wrong and ending up in legal trouble by Monday. He reassured me and promised to help with bail if needed. We parted ways on good terms. When I got home, Tracy had prepared another delicious meal, as she had been doing lately. Despite the tension between us, I made sure to thank her for the dinner and acknowledge her cooking skills. After dinner, we were going to watch TV in the family room when the doorbell rang. It was almost 7 o'clock, and I felt it wasn't for me, so I stayed where I was. Tracy went to answer the door. A well-dressed young man asked if she was Tracy Walters. When she confirmed, he gave her a manila envelope and said, "You have been served," then left quickly. Tracy looked shocked and started to cry. I closed the door and guided her to the kitchen table. We sat there quietly for a few minutes. Then she called me a rude name and went upstairs to our bedroom. I didn't follow her. The hardest part was over. For one of the rare times since we got married, I didn't sleep in the same bed as Tracy that night. Instead, I went to the guest bedroom we had set up. I didn't really sleep much. Tracy, who I used to think of as the love of my life, my soulmate, and everything to me until a few weeks ago, was still sharing a bed with me even after everything that happened. Maybe neither of us wanted to be the first to leave the bed, but in my mind, it was all over. The next morning, I woke up, took a shower, and got dressed quietly so as not to disturb Tracy or start any arguments. I didn't check if she was awake. I just gathered my things and left. I wore my usual clothes, a collared shirt, jeans, and cowboy boots I got in Dallas. I left a bit early to make sure I wasn't late for the meeting. Since I had some time, I stopped by a cafe to pass the time before the meeting. I got to George and Jenny's house right on time at 10 o'clock and pressed the doorbell. Jenny, who always looks nice but seemed a bit worried, opened the door. All I could say was, "I'm sorry things turned out this way." She didn't say anything back, but she took my hand and led me into the room where George kept his special things and pictures. George was sitting in his favorite chair, but when we came in, he stood up in front of it. "Hey, Clark," he greeted me. "Hi, George," I replied. Jenny seemed nervous and left the room. We stood a bit far from each other, checking each other out. There was a time when I thought of George almost like an older brother. We were that close. George was a bit older than me, about the same height, but he had gained some weight over the years, mostly in his belly. We used to share our dreams, had lots of adventures together, and even went fishing and hunting side by side. I used to be proud to call him my friend and proud of how well he was doing as a judge. But now, as he stood there, his look wasn't friendly anymore. It felt more like we were enemies, and it made me really mad. "I can't believe you've won over my wife, you jerk," I shouted angrily. "And you get to keep your perfect reputation because I promised Tracy I wouldn't spill the beans, and I stick to my promises." With determination, I took a bold step forward, firmly planting my left foot and swinging my right foot upward, aiming straight for his private area. George's reaction was slower than I thought, and my boot hit its mark with precision. I felt his pain as my foot connected, and then he let out a howl of agony as he crumpled to the ground, clutching his injury and crying out in pain. At that moment, all my anger and frustration burst out. Jenny hurried into the room, seeing her husband in pain on the floor. She tried to soothe him, but his cries only grew louder. Fear filled her eyes as she looked at me. I quickly grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and calmly told them, "There's been an accident at Judge George Anderson's house. We need an ambulance." As I turned to leave, Jenny stopped me, grabbing my arm. I braced myself, thinking I might have to defend myself. But instead of panic or anger, There was an oddly calm look on her face. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you. We know what to do." Returning the hug, I left the house, got into my car, and drove home, feeling sure that the police wouldn't be coming after me. Jenny understood, and she'd explain everything to her husband once he was feeling better. As I drove home, a mix of emotions flooded over me, relief, perhaps a bit of shock. After months of daily heartache, I finally felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It's strange how realizing Tracy's betrayal actually freed me from the hold she had on my heart, allowing me to think clearly and prioritize my own well-being. It might not be the choice everyone would make, but sometimes you have to put yourself first. After all, that's what everyone else seemed to have done for the past 20 years, so why shouldn't I? Sure, a part of me would always care for Tracy, but I wasn't going to dwell on this painful chapter any longer. It wasn't my fault, and it wasn't my decision. It was time to look ahead and move forward. Once I arrived home, I went down to the basement, grabbed a couple of suitcases, and headed to our bedroom. Tracy followed me from the family room, asking, "Is that it? Is that all?" I replied, after 31 years, "Yes, Tracy. It's sad that you're so focused on yourself that you can't see how you betrayed me, how you took away 24 years of my love with your lies. But I've moved past it, and I don't hate you. I don't even hate George, although he probably thinks I do now. I'll fix things with Barry and Kathy eventually. You should make amends with Marissa soon. Those girls deserve better. Sign the papers, Tracy, and let's move on." I added, "I'll get the rest of my stuff out in a few days. We don't need to talk anymore. If you have anything to say, my lawyer's business card is on the kitchen table." She stood there, stunned, tears welling in her eyes, but she couldn't speak. I took my suitcases, went back downstairs, and put them in the trunk of my car. Returning to the house, I packed up my things and left. 31 years, just like that. The end. But it wasn't the end. It turns out George managed to save one of his testicles after all. It required extensive surgery and months of pain, but they were able to save one. Marissa told me about it. Jenny had reached out to her trying to find me. Jenny didn't have my phone number, and the rest of the family had no interest in contacting me. In fact, they haven't spoken to me for 8 months now, but I've accepted it. According to the official story, Judge George had an accident in his office where he fell onto the corner of his desk twice, ending up on the floor. The media downplayed it, calling it a domestic accident and avoiding details about his injury. Surprisingly, he received a lot of sympathy in the news. It seems like even this won't hurt his chances of being considered for the Supreme Court shortlist. Tracy signed the divorce papers within a week, and recently, the divorce was finalized. The house will be put up for auction. Tracy hasn't tried to contact me since I left, and neither have Barry or Kathy. It looks like I won't be joining them for family Christmas dinner, wherever they decide to have it. The old man is handing over control of the company to me in the new year as he retires. According to the agreement, I'll have to manage the company for 7 years before I can comfortably retire with a good financial package. He intends to sell the company, and I'll receive a 10% share of that deal as well. After being married for what seemed like forever, I started going out and dating again. It'll take some time to get back into the swing of things. Interestingly, news of my divorce spread quickly, and quite a few divorced friends reached out, showing interest. Even a couple of Tracy's divorced friends called, surprised that she let me go. It's been a nice confidence boost. I see a bright future ahead, with both professional and personal challenges. In my free time, I'm exploring new hobbies. One thing I've decided to give up on is genealogy. I used to be interested in it, but it's not a pursuit of mine anymore.